Returning to our look at the aphorisms of Nietzsche, we can see that his style becomes based firmly upon the aphorism, i.e. the short, pithy saying that has a self-contained aspect to it, although it can be read out of context and in context for the maximum panoply of meanings. Nietzsche edges towards this style, beginning first as an essayist and working more and more towards the aphoristic style. He admires the 18th century aphorists such as La Rochefoucauld, as well as, of course, the Roman Latin epigrammists, and ultimately the lapidary style of Heraclitus, the ancient Greek pre-Socratic philosopher. It was in 1888, his last productive year, that Nietzsche put forward and published a very pithy aphoristic book called The Twilight of the Idols. The first chapter of this book was indeed a collection of 44 aphorisms called Maxims and Missiles. He condensed down in this book as a whole his philosophy in the most concise matter. That was his idea of this book, to put into the shortest book possible his philosophy. He did this as a counteract to the magnum opus he had been writing for a few years already, maybe 3 years, 5 years almost, amassing notes for his magnum opus, where he would write in an expansive style, a book which was published posthumously, as we know, as The Will to Power. He lost his mind before he could finish this book, and when labouring intensively on that book, he produced, as I say, this counteraction, this short aphoristic book, The Twilight of the Idols. This first chapter of Aphorisms is a very radical collection of sayings, which includes amongst it one of his most best-known sayings, that which does not kill me makes me stronger, and a few others in there as well for good measure. But if we go through the whole lot of the maxims from first to last, from 1 to 44, they are quite short. We can get the breadth of his concerns and his thoughts on philosophy, life, and the universe. So I will stop to add some comments to some of the maxims. The maxims which don't need any comments, I will just let pass as they go.
1. Idleness is the parent of all psychology. What? Is psychology then a vice?
This first aphorism is interesting because he's talking here of psychology. I think in an earlier draft he talked of philosophy. He said that philosophy was the product of idleness and therefore was a sin, because to Christians, to Christianity, idleness is one of the sins. Here he switches it to psychology, as I think at this point he's starting to think that his philosophy is far more of a psychology than a philosophy. And indeed, he was going to call the book Twilight of the Idols, he was going to call it the idleness of a philosopher, the idleness of a psychologist. And it was Peter Gast, his amanuensis, who convinced him to go for a more exciting title, hence the Twilight of the Idols.
Two. Even the pluckiest among us has but seldom the courage of what he really knows. 3. Aristotle says that in order to live alone, a man must be either an animal or a god. The third alternative is lacking. A man must be both, a philosopher.
Another important statement here: an animal and a god, a beast and a god. Here we have Nietzsche playing around with the concepts which play into the Superman idea. There are certain figures like Napoleon who are half Superman, half beasts. Nietzsche regarded himself sometimes as a beast, a cave bear, or a famous animal, as his sister called him. So this is quite self-referential in many ways and shows the outsider nature of the philosopher as Nietzsche considered it.
4. All truth is simple. Is not this a double lie?
Here we see the beginning of the interest in truth in these maxims. Reference here is to a Schopenhauer quote, that truth is simple. Nietzsche likes to play one off against the other. The truth is neither simple, or not all truth is simple. Some truth might be.
5. Once for all, I wish to be blind to many things. Wisdom sets bounds even to knowledge. 6. A man recovers best from his exceptional nature, his intellectuality, by giving his animal instincts a chance.
The instincts are brought to the fore here, once again in Nietzsche. Unusual for a philosopher to privilege the instincts over the intellect.
7. Which is it? Is man only a blunder of God, or is God only a blunder of man?
A common ploy in these aphorisms is a kind of circularity, paradoxalism, certain puns which are not always possible to render in translation, and of course lots of irony, as we can hear in that one.
8. From the military school of life. That which does not kill me makes me stronger.
Probably the most famous aphorism of this collection, although the title is often left out, From the Military School of Life. And that is quite important. For Nietzsche, the military ethos, the military structures, the military virtues are paramount. These he adheres to and always tries to maintain as a certain discipline and standard.
9. Help thyself, then everyone will help thee. A principle of neighbor love.
Neighbor love, of course, is a reference to Christianity, love of one's neighbor, and so forth. In these maxims, the ideals of Christian morality will often be played against the pagan, assertive master morality of Nietzsche.
10. A man should not play the coward to his deeds. He should not repudiate them once he has performed them. Pangs of conscience are indecent. 11. Can a donkey be tragic, to perish beneath a load that one can neither bear nor throw off? This is the case of the philosopher. 12. If a man knows the wherefore of his existence, then the manner of it can take care of itself.
Another famous aphorism from this set, given in various translations and versions. When we know our why, we can put up with any kind of how.
Man does not aspire to happiness. Only the Englishman does that.
A dig there at the English. For Nietzsche, the English are a non-philosophical race, a shallow race. Also, of course, he thinks that many of the worst ideas to infect Europe, particularly France, came from England. Ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity and democracy and all those sort of things. Although it's noted that whereas the English theorized about them and sent them abroad, they didn't always adhere to them themselves. It was the Continentals who were the dupes of those ideas and actually put them into place with terrifying effect. Though I think by now England has caught up and has become a dupe of herself.
13. Man created woman. Out of what? Out of a rib of his God, of his ideal. 14. What? Art thou looking for something? Thou wouldst fain multiply thyself 10-fold, 100-fold? Thou seekest followers? Seek ciphers.
Ciphers here, it means noughts or nobodies. The clever pun here is that if you want to multiply your followers, go from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, etc., etc., you are adding noughts in so doing. Well, look ye, you are adding nobodies. Pish to your followers. Perhaps that's a note for YouTubers too.
15. Posthumous men, like myself, are not so well understood as men who reflect their age, but they are heard with more respect. In plain English, we are never understood, hence our authority. 16. Among women, truth? Oh, you do not know truth. Is it not an outrage on all our pudeurs?
Pudeurs here is modesties with a sense of shame. Truth as a woman, truth is often personified in that way by Nietzsche. He obviously does not believe in absolute truths, not in Platonic truths or Christian truths. He sees truth to be as fickle as is woman. And here woman too does not want truth to look beneath her skirts.
17. There is an artist after my own heart, modest in his needs. He really wants only two things, his bread and his art. Panem et circum.
Here Nietzsche puns on the Latin bread and circuses from the Roman Empire. Give them bread and circuses. Here he calls it bread and Circes. Circe being the female monster who lured men to their death or turned them into animals.
He who knows not how to plant his will in things, at least endows them with some meaning. That is to say, he believes that a will is already present in them, a principle of faith. 19. What? Ye chose virtue and the heaving breast, and at the same time ye squint covetously at the advantages of the unscrupulous? But with virtue ye renounce all advantages. Paren, to be nailed to an anti-Semite's door. And
here is an attack he makes on anti-Semitism, which occurs frequently in other writings or letters. Essentially, the Christian attack on Jews, that they are sinful, is driven by envy, according to Nietzsche here. Envious of the Jews, they criticize the Jews for being sinful. But by the same token, by the Christian token, envy itself is a sin. So if those Christians were really Christians, then they would not be anti-Semites, because they would not be envious.
paren. 20. The perfect woman perpetuates literature as if it were a petty vice, as an experiment, en passant, and looking about her all the while to see whether anybody is noticing her, hoping that somebody is noticing her.
Nietzsche was, of course, opposed to women in the arts and in higher culture. Maybe this bitter maxim is slightly coloured by his relationship or breakdown of relationship with Lou von Salome, who herself was a writer, of course.
21. One should adopt only those situations in which one is in no need of sham virtues, but rather, like the tightrope dancer on his tightrope, in which one must either fall or stand or escape.
Worth noting here the use of the tightrope walker, a dominant theme in the first part of Thus Spake Zarathustra, symbolizing the relation between the ape, mankind, and the Superman.
22. Quote, evil men have no songs, unquote. How is it that the Russians have songs?
Again, Nietzsche's ironic humour, the saying from an old song, that bad men don't have any songs. Nietzsche's admiration for the Russians was a kind of admiration for the monster, kind of awe of Russia.
23. German intellect. For 18 years, this has been a contradictio in adjecto.
Contradictio in adjecto, a contradiction in terms, of course. German intellect, the word used is Geist, and can be intellect, spirit, mind, etc. For 18 years, so since the foundation of the Second Reich by Bismarck, Nietzsche felt that this coarsened all German Geist, culture, intellect, and had led to the downfall of German culture.
24. By seeing the beginning of things, a man becomes a crab. The historian looks backwards. In the end, he also believes backwards.
This is reminiscent of Kierkegaard's life must be lived forward but understood backwards. Nietzsche is quite on the edge of what will become existential thinking, but he's actually gone far beyond it.
25. Contentment preserves one even from catching cold. Has a woman who knew that she was well-dressed ever caught cold? No, not even when she had scarcely a rag to her back. 26. I distrust all systematizers and avoid them. The will to a system shows a lack of honesty.
This is an aphorism which is forgotten by most modern soft Nietzscheans, likes of Essential Sorts and his henchmen who swarm the social media. When I present them with this aphorism, they run a mile, some even asserting that it's not a Nietzsche quote or it's out of context, etc. Well, you can hear it there. It's purely an aphorism. That is it, from start to finish. He distrusts and he despises systematizers. A will to system is a lack of integrity. And that's why you cannot systematize Nietzsche's work. Although the soft Nietzscheans do try, don't they?
27. Man thinks woman profound. Why? Because he can never fathom her depths. Woman is not even shallow. 28. When woman possesses masculine virtues, she is enough to make you run away. When she possesses no masculine virtues, she herself runs away.
And near the twain shall meet, and this is, of course, the great problem of today with the emergence of transsexuality, transgenderism, feminism, and passivity amongst men. It has led to a kind of stalemate in the production of the race. So Nietzsche's rather swinging attacks on women do have a very real point. Feminism has been disastrous for Western culture.
29. How often conscience had to bite in times gone by. What good teeth it must have had. And today, what is amiss? A dentist's question.
This alludes to a previous maxim earlier in this collection, where he plays upon the term a bite of conscience. I think we have a similar construction in English. Of course, Nietzsche is opposed to the whole idea of a conscience, of guilt, of shame and regret, and indeed resentment, and those crab-like looking back pangs of conscience.
30. Errors of haste are seldom committed singly. The first time, a man always does too much, and precisely on that account he commits a second error, and then he does too little. 31. The trodden worm curls up. This testifies to its caution. It thus reduces its chances of being trodden on again. In the language of morality, humility. 32. There is such a thing as a hatred of lies and dissimulation, which is the outcome of a delicate sense of humor. There is also the selfsame hatred, but as the result of cowardice, insofar as falsehood is forbidden by divine law, too cowardly to lie.
There we see, in humorous dress, Nietzsche's revaluation of Christian virtues. He does not consider lying to always be a bad thing. In fact, lying can be a virtue.
33. What trifles constitute happiness? The sound of a bagpipe. Without music, life would be a mistake. The German imagines even God as a songster.
This latter section again alludes to Nietzsche's ironic sense of humour, which is perhaps quite un-German, I don't know. Here, the line that God likes to sing in heaven was a deliberate misreading of the line that we like to sing to God in heaven. He deliberately misread it, and misled it. Peter Gast wrote to Nietzsche and said that he'd misread this line. And Nietzsche replied, probably somewhat unfairly, that this showed that Gast was not at the same level as Nietzsche, because Nietzsche knew he had misread the line, but retained it as it was funny.
34. On ne peut penser et écrire qu'aussi. Flaubert. Here I've got you, you nihilist. A sedentary life is the real sin against the Holy Spirit. Only those thoughts that come by walking have any value.
The Flaubert quote, which begins at, is that only thoughts and writings which are done sitting down have any value. Nietzsche rejects that wholesale and regards it as nihilistic, saying, as we heard, that only thoughts that come by walking have value. And we know that much of Nietzsche's writings came about while he walked around the areas of Switzerland, the forests of Germany, the French and Italian Rivieras, writing thoughts down while he walked in a notebook, and then using that material later to work up his books. Although there is a probably uncomfortable parallel here for Nietzsche, and that's in Socrates, who I think regarded the same thing as being true, that thoughts always come best when we walk. Something to do with the motion of the body, adding to the ratiocinations of the brain.
35. There are times when we psychologists are like horses and grow fretful. We see our own shadow rise and fall before us. The psychologist must look away from himself if he wishes to see anything at all.
And there we have it, the sheer profound depth of Nietzsche's psychology before Freud, before Jung. Freud said that Nietzsche knew himself better than anybody else at that time. But he knew himself so well that he knew that you had to look away from yourself before you could see yourself.
36. Do we immoralists injure virtue in any way? Just as little as the anarchists injure royalty. Only since they have been shot at do princes sit firmly on their thrones once more. Morality must be shot at. 37. Thou runnest ahead. Dost thou do so as a shepherd or as an exception? A third alternative would be the fugitive. First question of conscience. 38. Art thou genuine, or art thou only an actor? Art thou a representative, or the thing represented itself? Finally, art thou perhaps simply a copy of an actor? Second question of conscience.
These sections are quite difficult here. He's referring to conscience, that thing that he abjures. But here he's providing questions of conscience to himself, which are reminiscent of Zarathustra's conundrums, and also Nietzsche's uncertainties as regards higher men, great men. And in the following aphorism, he will say the actor and his ideal, which is probably a reference to Wagner.
"39. The disappointed man speaks. I sought for great men, but all I found were the apes of their ideal. 40. Art thou one who looks on, or one who puts his own shoulder to the wheel? Or art thou one who looks away, or who turns aside? Third question of conscience. 41. Wilt thou go in company, or lead, or go by thyself? A man should know what he desires, and that he desires something. Fourth question of conscience. 42. They were but rungs in my ladder. On them I made my ascent. To that end, I had to go beyond them. But they imagined that I wanted to lay myself to rest upon them. 43. What matters it whether I am acknowledged to be right? I am much too right, and he who laughs best today will also laugh last. 44. The formula of my happiness, a yea, a nay, a straight line, a goal.
The last aphorism there is another famous one, otherwise rendered in more mundane English as a yes, a no, a straight line, and a goal. A formula for my happiness. And it sums up the pithy aphorisms of that section, of that book, and really of Nietzsche's temperament as a thinker and a writer, trying to get at the very core of the matter, but always in a somewhat complex, almost in a somewhat mysterious, covertly twisted way. I can't quite put it into words myself. It's simple, it's getting at the core, and yet it's not simple. The meanings are not quite graspable. The ideas are not quite finalized, and they're far from being absolute in any way. The ideas lead you somewhere you've often haven't been before, but at the same time, you cannot say, yes, I have the formula. A yes, I know, a straight line and a goal. No, it can't be as simple as that, because systematizers are always people without integrity. And Nietzsche had integrity. So these aphorisms provide us with a lot to think on. You could spend 20 years turning these over and still not get to the bottom of them. And I guess that's the idea.